Well, it's an extraordinary moment in American politics. The US President Joe Biden hosting a NATO summit, standing at a microphone, trying to reassure American allies and enemies, voters, donors, opponents, and members of his own Democratic Party that he is fit to serve and run for re-election. But minutes in, the gaffe started, mixing up his opponent and vice president, an ally and an enemy. To help us decipher what is going to happen in November, we have with us historian Allan Lichtman. Mr. Lichtman has correctly predicted the results of 9 of the 10 most recent US presidential elections. And he warns that if Democratic delegates rebel against Joe Biden and choose another Democratic nominee, it could spell chaos for the party. But thank you for joining us on the NDTV network, Mr. Lichtman. Those calling for Biden to drop out now include Peter Welch of Vermont, several House Democrats, as well as mega donor George Clooney. Does he need his trusted friends in the Democratic leadership to show him the way? Do you think more prominent names will actually join this chorus and ask Biden to step down?
Here's what all those people who are asking Biden to step down have in common. The journalists, the political operatives like James Carville, the Hollywood celebrities like George Clooney, the pundits, the Democratic senators and congressmen. They have no track record in predicting elections, and yet they claim to be able to predict what the Democrats need to do to win. I do have a track record through my keys to the White House, the 13 keys that have been right for 40 years since I predicted Ronald Reagan's reelection in April 1982 during what was then the worst recession since the Great Depression, when his approval ratings were in the gutter. And the keys show the folly of trying to push Biden out and find, some savior for the Democrats. The way my system works, if 6 keys go against the White House party, they're predicted losers. Biden ticks off the incumbency key and the party contest key because 87% of primary voters nominated him. We follow the advice of all these critics. You lose the incumbency key and you lose the party contest key. So instead of starting 2 keys up with 6 of the remaining 11 have to fall to predict their defeat, you start 2 keys down and only 4 keys would have to fall to predict their defeat. But leave aside the keys, look at history. Since the turn of the 20th century, the party holding the White House has never, and I repeat, never won when there's an open seat at an internal party contest. What in effect these critics are doing is recreating the situation in 2016 of an open seat in a party contest that led to the election of Donald Trump in the first place. And, they're all claiming, oh my God, all these horrible polls on Biden. And it is true. A substantial majority of the American people think Biden is too old and may be diminished, but that doesn't mean they're going to vote against him. A poll came out today from the Washington Post, ABC News, which showed Trump and Biden head-to-head in a dead heat, 46% to 46%. Even when you throw in all the other candidates, which is very reliable, they're still in a dead heat, with Trump at 43, Biden at 42. In other words, despite all this moaning and crying and carrying out their dirty laundry in public, there is no evidence that the debate diminished Biden's reelection chances. Also, a couple of days ago, a swing state poll came out. Biden has been trailing in the swing states. This was a poll of 3 states. It showed Biden ahead in the critical swing states of Michigan and Wisconsin, behind in Arizona, but within striking distance. And there was another poll from Emerson College, an independent poll, which tested the proposition of whether these supposed white knight candidates who would save the Democratic Party would do better against Trump than Biden. Again, head-to-head, the poll had Trump and Biden even, 50-50, and it looked at 9 other alternatives, and every one of them trailed between a minimum of 5 points and a maximum of 10 points behind Donald Trump.
But sir, some say the last 2-3 days have been quite damaging for the Biden campaign. What kind of effect has this had on his candidacy?
Doesn't seem to have been damaging at all based
Right.
upon the post-election polls. And, I have to really call out the media on this. They've done everything in their power to undermine Biden. I get all these news feeds, and the great majority of stories are about Biden's faltering debate performance. And that's legitimate. But they have totally underplayed the far more dangerous debate performance of Donald Trump, who's tried to lie his way to the presidency. He issued one lie for every 1 minute to 20, 30 seconds of speaking time. Huge lies about the January 6th insurrection, about the 220 election, about Roe versus Wade, where he claims everybody wanted it overturned when over 60% of the American people didn't. He lied about inflation, saying it's gone up 4 times. In fact, it's gone up 1/8 of that, 25%. And just today, a new report came out showing that in June, inflation actually went down rather than up. Plus, Trump has promised to be a dictator. He said, I'll be a dictator just on day one, but every dictator in the history of the world that's been a dictator on day one has been a dictator forever. So at least there should have been an even coverage, not overwhelming coverage on Biden and ignoring, to a great extent, Trump. Finally, too little, too late, the New York Times, which has trashed Biden mercilessly, came out too little, too late today saying Donald Trump is not fit to be president. And they're absolutely right. Our democracy is hanging by a thread. And you know what? All these media folks who've been complicit with Donald Trump will rue the day if Donald Trump gets elected, because like other authoritarians, one of the first things he will do under the cover of Supreme Court immunity will be to snuff out the independent media.
Right. But sir, last time we spoke, you had mentioned that it was too early to predict the outcome for November. Has that changed now? Where do both the candidates, Trump and Biden, stand?
I have not made a final prediction. I will do so after the Democratic convention in August. But based on my keys, a lot would have to go wrong for Biden to lose. Certainly
That's what you said last time as well.
But right now, Biden is down 2 of my keys. Remember, 6, and his party loses the White House. He's down my mandate key because of Democratic losses in the midterm U.S. House elections. He's down my incumbent charisma key because he's no FDR or Ronald Reagan. And here are the 4 shaky keys your audience should be looking at. Third party will, and this is the only time I use polls, but I don't take them at face value, I cut them in half. To be a significant third party to count against the White House party, the candidate has to get at least 5% of the vote. But I don't know that. So I take the polls, but I cut them in half because of the Lichtman wasted vote syndrome. I love you, RFK Jr., but you can't win, so I'm not going to vote for you. So he's got to stabilize at least 10%. Social unrest. Will we get an explosion of social unrest this summer, comparable to the 1960s or the Black Lives Matter movement? Doesn't look that way, but that's still possible. And finally, we have the foreign/military success and failure keys. With respect to that, here's what I'm looking at. All these critics of Biden have not shown at all that it's affected his presidency. He's had an amazing presidency, incredibly competent. Debate performance is way down on the list of what it takes to be a successful president. And Biden's always had issues with debate performance. Far more important are your values, your judgment, your experience, your respect for American democracy and its institutions. Biden has more domestic accomplishments than any president since the 1960s. It was Biden and Biden alone that put together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin from conquering Ukraine. And inflation has gone down 2/3 on his watch. And as I said, the latest report shows inflation has actually declined in June. So, what's the measure? A bad debate or 3.5 years plus of a presidency? And what I'm looking for right now that I think could change the whole narrative, and I don't know if it's going to happen, but it's possible, would
Mr.
be if
Lichtman,
Biden brokers a ceasefire and a hostage release in the Middle East.
so far, Biden and his staff have remained defiant in the face of calls to quit the US presidential race. Do you think they'll budge or keep resisting these calls? And would a Harris-led ticket give Democrats a better shot at beating Donald Trump?
Democrats have long claimed, hey, we know it's electable, right? We've nominated some really electable candidates, experienced candidates, knowledgeable candidates, proven winners, candidates who win debates, like Walter Mondale in 1984, Michael Dukakis in 1988, John Kerry in 2004, Hillary Clinton in 2016. And what do all those electable candidates have in common? They've all lost. So not only don't these Democrats and other critics have any track record of prediction, they are completely misguided when it comes to who they think is electable.
Right, but do you think the dismal debate performance of Biden and the calls for him to quit the race have actually tilted the scales in Trump's favor?
I don't think so. The polls don't
Right.
show any change. If anything, in the swing states, Biden has improved. And the media spin has been totally misleading. You would think nobody thought Biden won the debate. In fact, the CNN poll showed 33% thought Biden won the debate. And it was a sample that leaned Republican. So if it was a more even sample, likely more respondents would have thought Biden won the debate. And you would think from the media, remember, the great majority of Americans didn't watch the debate. They got their spin from the media. You would think this is the worst debate for a Democrat in history. Nonsense. Barack Obama in his first debate, only 20%, not 33%,
Right.
thought Obama won the debate. And the polls did swing 12 points. Romney went from 8 points down among likely voters to 4 points up. And all the pundits, not all of them, but a lot of the pundits were saying Obama's dead, he's finished, Romney is going to win. Big cautions from the lessons of history. And, not only have these critics ignored the most successful prediction system that's been right for 40 years, they've ignored the history of what happens when there's an open seat in a contest, and they've ignored the history of debates.
Right.
Debates have no predictive value. Hillary Clinton won the debates. John Kerry won the debates, and of course they lost.
Meanwhile, as the Democrats go into a very public meltdown about Joe Biden's fitness to be their presidential candidate, there is an unusual sound emanating from Donald Trump. Silence. Many say it's so out of character. You believe this is a deliberate strategy? He's known to strike when the iron is hot.
I have a plan B for the Democrats. If they're foolish enough to force Biden out, what Biden should do then is resign the presidency for the good of the country. If he doesn't have the capacity to campaign, it's hard to say he's the capacity to govern for another 6 months or so. He would resign for the good of the country, which would contrast him with Donald Trump, who's only in it for himself. Harris would become president. She'd become the consensus nominee as the sitting president, and they would tick off again the incumbency key and the contest key. But if he just steps down and then the Democrats have a big brawl trying to figure out who should replace him, and the polls show no alternative does better, they all do worse. But leaving that aside, they lose both those keys. So that's my plan B.
Well, many would argue that the Democrats are in trouble with very few good options at the moment. Some would say their best hope is that Donald Trump reverts to form and stops giving them the silent treatment. But always a pleasure to hear your perspective, Allan Lichtman. Thank you so much for joining us on the NDTV network.